สวัสดีค่ะ So my topic is on parenting across cultures, particularly the different stereotypical views people have on the difference between Western parenting styles and Eastern parenting styles. So parenting can be simply defined as the process of or the state of being a parent. Once you have a child, you are automatically involved in the process of parenting. However, it is not that simple, and parenting can be defined as the process of developing and utilizing the knowledge and skills appropriate to planning for, creating, giving birth to, rearing, or providing care for offspring. This definition implies that parenting starts when there is a plan for it, and it involves not just bringing up the children, but also providing care for them. Parental control has long been identified as one of the major parenting factors influencing children's mental health. Only in recent decades has parental control become the subject of systematic empirical research. Parental control is defined as a cluster of behaviors through which parents excessively control and regulate their children's activities and routines, or encourage their children's dependence on the parents themselves, and instruct the children on how they should think and feel. And high parental control is believed to reduce the perceived personal mastery that the children have on themselves and control the children have on their own behaviors, which are said to induce a sense of helplessness in the children, thus generating anxiety and depression. So every culture is characterized and distinguished from other cultures by deep-rooted and widely acknowledged ideas about how one needs to feel, think, and act as a functioning member of the culture. Cross-cultural study affirms that groups of people possess different beliefs and engage in different behaviors that may be normative in their culture but are not necessarily normative in the other culture. And cultural groups thus embody particular characteristics that are deemed essential or advantageous to their members. These beliefs and behaviors tend to persist over time from generation to generations and constitute the valued competencies that are communicated to new members of the group. Central to a concept of culture, therefore, is the expectation that different cultural groups possess distinct beliefs and behave in unique ways with respect to their parenting style. And cultural variations in parenting beliefs and behaviors are impressive, whether observed among different, ethnic groups in one society or across societies in different parts of the world. And so the main aim of this study is to raise awareness in people, whether it be the parents, the kids who will become parents in the future, so that they would acknowledge the impacts that cultures could have on the way they raise their children, as well as the direct effects that culture may have on the children's lives from the young age to the rest of their lives. And other than raising awareness, I would like people in every culture to acknowledge the fact that they are being affected every single second by cultures, especially how they interact, not just with their children, but how they interact with their peers, their family members, their spouse, but mostly their children, and how their children view their parenting as a result of being in a specific culture. Permissive parents are likely to make fewer demands on their children, allowing them to regulate their own activities as much as possible. Having different goals influences how parents interact with children. Research shows that Western parents tend to be more sensitive to children's specific needs and pay more attention to their developmental stages. When they interact with children, they try to explain when they want them to do something. Western parents tend to be more patient than their Eastern counterparts, using a low-power strategy that involves explanations as well as listening to and trying to communicate with children about their views and feelings. Authoritarian parents have a set of standards by which they attempt to shape, control, and evaluate the attitudes and behavior of their children. And they tend to be highly interactive with their children and value unquestioning obedience. In more collectivist cultures, such as China and Korea, parents are expected to assume greater responsibilities in child development. To fulfill that expectation, they tend to be highly involved in child rearing and child education, sometimes using high power strategies. They may order their children to do certain things, providing little to no explanation or reasoning at all. They want their children to obey them so that they emphasize compliance and obedience. And in a high power approach, if children don't listen, parents may use force or punishment. This approach reflects the parents' goals, which are to develop children who listen and who learn qualities such as cooperation, compliance, and self control, which could be useful for adapting to the society in their parents' view. So, the assigned article to class for my presentation was Parental Control, a second cross-cultural research on parenting and psychological adjustment of children. So in this research, it was hypothesized that parental control will be associated with family connectedness, culture, and parents and adolescents' sex. The association between parental control and psychological disorders will differ across cultures, specifically higher in the Western than Eastern countries, and the inconsistency between father and mother control will be associated with adolescents' psychological disorders. And their method in testing these hypotheses was to administer a set of questionnaires to adolescents in 9 different countries. And the results of the study showed that parental control is associated with culture and with family connectedness. Parents in Eastern countries impose higher control on their children than Western parents do. A positive correlation coefficient was found between child-parent connectedness and parental control, such that higher control is correlated with more connectedness between the child and his or her parents. In comparing the child-parent's connectedness and parental control across countries, it appears that in countries where children and parents tend to be connected, parents tend to be controlling, suggesting an association between the dimensions of collectiveness and authoritarianism. As to parents' gender differences across all countries, mothers were perceived as more controlling than fathers. These differences were more salient in the West than in the East. Parental control was associated with the gender of the parents and adolescents. When fathers and mothers' control over boys and girls was analyzed separately in Western and Eastern countries, it was found that Western mothers were more controlling of their sons than the fathers, and Eastern mothers were more controlling of their daughters than the fathers. Parental control reveals minor association with the socioeconomic level of the family. Only a higher economic status of the family was associated with higher father's control, not with the mother's control. No association was found, however, between the parents' control and their education. It appears that parental control is determined more by cultural and gender-related factors than by socioeconomic factors. When the association of fathers and mothers' control with psychological disorders was tested together, it was found that the association between fathers' control and psychological disorders was significant in the West, but not in the East. These cultural differences may be explained by the inconsistency hypothesis of Dewary 2007, which claimed that parental control does not cause significant harm to children in authoritarian or collective societies because control in such societies is considered entirely normal and consistent with the authoritarian general atmosphere in which the children live, whereas the West authoritarian parenting and control is not so consistent with the general liberal cultural climate, and thus it may be perceived by both the parents and the kids as an abuse and harmful to children's mental health. An incongruence between parental control and liberal Western culture may foster ambivalent feelings towards parents and the self, and the perception that the parents' attitude is unjust in the eyes of their children. And the cultural differences in the association between parental control and psychological disorders in the children could be alternatively explained via the distinction made between positive and negative control. It is reasonable to assume that parental control in the East is perceived as positive control and in the West as negative, hence the differences in the association with adolescents' mental health, such that the positive might not have such bad consequences in the East, and when the control was perceived as negative in the West, it leads to bad mental health of the children. And these are according to the Braungart-Rieger and al. 1997, Chow 2001, and Kakichibashi 1970 and 2005. The list of references will be provided with this video. And so, interestingly, the association found between psychological disorders and mother's control when analyzed separately from the fathers diminished when analyzed together with the fathers. Based on the high correlation between fathers and mother's control, it was assumed that mother control acquires its association with psychological disorders from the fact that it was related to the father's control, because the father was the dominant figure in the family. It is actually very difficult to explain why the father's control may cause more harm to the children, psychological adjustment, than the mother's control, and higher in Western countries than the father's control. And one possible way to explain it is by assuming that the more problematic the child or adolescent in this article was, the more the father would become involved and more control he exerts on his children. And this involvement comes in addition to the mother's control as an attempt to contain their children's problems. And put in another way, the mother's control is always there and ever greater than the father's because they spend more time with their kids on a general basis. But when the father's control is intensified because the child is a little bit problematic, then it is typically associated with the manifestation of greater psychological problems among adolescents as well. And with regard to gender differences, it is assumed that the roles of fathers and mothers are also different across cultures. And so the role of Eastern mothers is almost exclusively focused on home care and child rearing. They stay home with their children all the time, whereas more Western mothers focused on professional careers and let their children live independently. And so although Eastern mothers are close to their children and exert a great deal of control over them, they may lack what is called the personal authority, and therefore they exert that control in the name of the father authority. And so parental control not only is influenced by the parent's gender across cultures, but also on the child's gender, because boys may be more problematic than girls or the other way around. And these was quoted by Troyandis 1995 and Doueiri 1998. And so this possible explanation, of course, requires additional research to validate the gaps within this research, such as the interaction between parents and adolescents' gender, which also requires additional validation in future studies and still needs to be explained as well. And the results of this research are important for understanding the dynamic between parents and children across cultures. What we used to believe are good for our family may not be effective in other family, which may hold different cultural views and background from us. So it is quite an unfair thing to say that you raise your kid that way and the other people should do it that way too in order to achieve the same success that you have with your kids or something. And so this study may contribute to theories regarding psychological development, psychopathology, and culture. The results are also useful in fitting culturally sensitive interventions among children and parents in different cultures. Based on the results, parental control in Eastern countries need not necessarily be perceived in a negative light and to be avoided as long as harmony within the family is maintained. And so Eastern parents these days may try to develop the Western permissive parenting styles on their children, which, as the study showed, may not be suitable for their kids who grew up in the Eastern culture. And so one should focus more on their connectedness and relationship with their children rather than how they should parent their children as a parent. And so according to this article provided by Duary and Ashui 2010 on parental control that I made the whole class read, there are various factors that should be taken into consideration when we explore the impact of different parenting styles on children's behavior. One of the most prominent aspects to examine is the culture in which the children are brought up. An interesting point that the authors had raised is that the control that the parents exert in the family does not cause significant harm to the children, depending on the culture they are in, and due to the values that the society held, such that in a more collective society where control is perceived as not deviant from the norms, an authoritative act of the parents towards their children may not be considerably damaging. And from this, it could be inferred that the inconsistency between the norms and parenting that are established and the parents' actual behaviors towards their children could actually influence how the children perceive their parents' treatments towards them, which then could also affect their well-being. And the others had suggested that since the West's general liberal view on parenting is inconsistent with the authoritarian style of the Eastern Rite, parents' authoritative actions may be viewed as negatively affecting the children's mental well-being. However, this leads to more unanswered questions like, what about a situation where authoritarian parenting is viewed as common in the East, but the children are raised in a liberal manner? This can create inconsistency between the norms and the parenting behavior as well. But will it actually negatively affect those children's mental health? And in my opinion, I think that the way parenting style affects a child is really subjective. There are several factors to consider, like the age of the children observed, because you probably will not care as much if your parents dictate your, let's say, clothing or food choice when you were 5 years old. But it would be different when you're an adolescent or even when you became an adult. And in which aspect of the children's life is the parents controlling and other behaviors that counterbalance the controlling parenting style. Because in the Eastern world, sometimes if your parents used to control you a lot and suddenly they stop, you may feel that it's not controlling that they're doing, it's the care that they're showing. And once they stop, you just feel like they don't care about you anymore. So it could be affecting the children's mental health differently as well, but we don't know exactly which factor that leads to the specific mental health observed. So further research can be done on this as well. That's all for my final report as a video, and it's gonna be quite long, so thank you in advance for listening, and also thank you so much for the course นะคะขอบคุณค่ะ